So religion itself is how we oftentimes see the world. And that's sort of the point of religion, is to understand how the world is seen, how it changes. It gives us this set of beliefs and practices and rituals that create a unique way of observing the universe, right? And giving us these explanations through supernatural processes, right? The things that we can't fully understand, the things that we can observe but don't know why. Then we create these supernatural reasons. And if we can start to understand what those supernatural powers are, those supernatural explanations, then we can really get a good idea of what's going on in that community. Again, understanding that as anthropologists, we don't seek validity of a religion. Rather, we try and seek the understanding of it, understanding how people fit within their worldview. And this is really important, especially when it comes to understanding how men versus women fit into the world, right? What is this religious view that they have? Where do children fit into the world, into this dynamic? And what about the elderly? Where do animals fit into the world? What is their role? What do people of different religions or different races or different ideologies, where do they fit in to the world? Once you start figuring all of that stuff out, then you can start to figure out, again, much more about this community. And that's where, religion is so important to the way that anthropologists look into a community and to try and understand all of these things. We also have to look at not only how they are dealing with the localized idea of religion, but how is it on a global level, right? And especially when we're looking at organizations like Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Buddhism, which some practice as a religion, some practice as a sort of an understanding, a methodology, not as a religion. Buddhism's pretty cool in a lot of different ways. But they all sort of, work on this global scale and change drastically on local scales. So you might have an entity like the Catholic Church, and you've got the Pope that sits on top of that church, and that Pope then decrees something, and then it sort of spreads through the bishops and goes through everyone else, down to the regular normal parishioner, where they're enacting what the Pope is saying. And it's interesting because if we look at our history, even American history, if we go back to John F. Kennedy, okay, let's talk about JFK for a second. A lot of people didn't want JFK to become president because he was Catholic. And they thought that his Catholic beliefs would be influenced, that his behavior as a president would be influenced by the Pope, and that the Pope would have a large influence onto Kennedy's life. And there were a lot of people that were really scared of that taking place. So, you can have these large global entities, these large religions, that can have a huge impact on a population, even a population in which the majority of that population does not represent that religion. And then we also look at sort of the global impacts that religion can have on smaller localized religions. So, how is Christianity affecting communities around the world? and how are they impacting these communities that might have more traditional beliefs, their own traditional beliefs, but are now coming into conflict with Christianity, and in a lot of ways are disappearing because Christianity is so dominating in so many different ways that these folks are literally losing their religion to this overpowering religion. And this is happening not only with Christianity, but with Islam and not so much Judaism, because that's Judaism isn't necessarily into proselytizing as Christianity and Islam are. So they maintain a relatively small group of folks that believe and practice. So how these religions are engaging and how they spread, right? And I'm sure some of you have had folks knocking on your door and want to talk to you about some religious practice, the Jehovah's Witnesses, or you might see Mormons, you might see other people out there that are trying to get you to join the club, right? So how those practices are spread, again, is a really important question to ask. And how do we look at the organization, and what does it take to become a member of that religion? So the global aspect and the local aspect are really important to compare, because they might not always look the same. There's always differences that are involved, but they also have a lot of those traits. And we talked about that a little bit like last week, talking about culture and language, how things can differ from town to town. So this is sort of the same. Some of the same stuff can be happening here. One of the things that we also have to understand is that religion is also constantly changing and adapting to new situations. Now, we oftentimes think as religion as being sort of this mega institution, and that, you know, if we look at like Christianity, that it's rarely ever changing so much. We don't necessarily see it, but it really does adapt to new situations depending on what's going on, and it can do that in different ways. When we look at globalization, you know, we see that Christianity spread very quickly around the globe as people brought it with them, right? It can change depending on the situation. So if we look at warfare, if we look at stuff like that, we can look at how religion can influence people to behave certain ways, and that can influence a community. So religion itself, oftentimes we look at religion as a means of peace, right? And a lot of times that's sort of like the idealism behind most religions, is that it's about bringing peace, it's about bringing hope, understanding to various communities. It's about love and respect, but it's also run by people. And as we know, people aren't always good in nature. And so if you have that religious power, we might find that it can foster anger and hatred and fear as well. And oftentimes in those that don't follow that particular religion. And we've seen this in many decades now when we discuss like American idealism, American religion and Christianity versus Islam, right? And the Muslim threat to America, you know, and we don't want Sharia law to come into the United States and stuff like that. And all of that stuff aside, that there's a lot of fear that's coming in here. There's a lot of angst that this kind of stuff is going to be changing the American identity. And so we have to look at why this is taking place. You know, what is making people believe this? What are people? What are their fears? And part of the anthropologist's objective here is not necessarily to discount fear. And this is something I think is really important in general as we're as creating a civil discourse. Okay. And this goes for a lot of things, even outside of religion, if we get into politics and stuff like that, is creating a civil discourse in which we take these ideas that we have and we look at someone else and they have very different ideas about what should be happening. And instead of yelling at each other and saying, well, you're an idiot, no, you're an idiot, and it's like, oh, you know, and instead of doing that kind of stuff, you know, actually having the conversation and saying, well, this is what I believe. Well, this is what I believe. Well, you know, that's sort of what I believe. Well, yeah, I can see that, but let's have a discussion about this. And actually creating that discourse and sort of taking out the animosity and anger out of these sort of conflicts that we're facing. And this is happening all the time, all over the place. And so when we look at what people are saying when it comes to, say, Islam in the Middle East and all of that stuff, right? I think a lot of what we need to do as anthropologists, as scientists, is start asking questions as to why is this being said, right? Why is these subjects coming up? Why are you so scared of what's going on, and what's causing these feelings, and sort of figure out the rationale. And an anthropologist is gonna sit there and say, okay, this is what's going on, right? These are the things that are being said. This is what people are following and believing and hearing, and therefore they're taking on this approach, whether or not there is actually any validity to anything that's being said, right? Because again, religion being such an important aspect of a community, can drive people to irrational ideas without actually considering what's really happening. So, you know, as an anthropologist and looking at sort of the greater scope of religious practice and stuff like that, you know, being able to create that sort of that venue for discussion can be really important, and can help sort of alleviate some of those questions and those fears. Because if we look at the consequences of people behaving well to each other or behaving poorly to each other, we can see things like the civil rights movement, right? Who is basically being led, you know, if we talk about like Martin Luther King Jr., and these Christian ideals of peace and love thy neighbor and all of this stuff. These are great ideals, right? These are great things to believe in. And religion has also been the means to which millions of people have been killed because somebody didn't believe in somebody else's practice or somebody else's belief. And, you know, the perfect example for that is like World War II. You know, if we look at the extermination of the Jews by the Nazis, or the Gypsies, or other Christian sects that fought against this Nazi idealism. we can see the consequences of intolerance. And so a lot of this, we can find within religion, we can find where those tolerances and intolerances lie, and what people are willing to do versus what they're not willing to do. I think a good example are like the Amish or the Mennonites, who lived a very, very peaceful lifestyle, and reject a lot of technology, and create community and do all of this stuff that is against violence, and is also but very independent as well. And then we've seen other Christian churches that will promote violence and promote racism and stuff, and so we have to also understand that people have this sort of influence, and with the guise of religious ideology, you can sway people to do incredible things. And there are lots of examples of cults, Jamestown and Waco, Texas, and these different events that have taken place where people were persuaded by a spiritual leader to commit genocide, or to commit suicide, and to commit atrocities against each other because of some sort of religious belief. And so, again, this is why it's really important to understand religion. If we look back at the film Dead Birds, right? We looked at Dead Birds a number of weeks ago, and one of the reasons why these two tribes were fighting was because of the spirits of the dead, right? These spirits had to be had to have revenge, right? That was part of it, was the fact that this person was killed, and they would not feel justice, they would not feel at peace until at some point there's a retribution taking place, and somebody on the other side had to die to compensate and to set that spirit free. We can gain a lot of information about that. So, think about those kinds of things, and how power and religion are very well an issue that we have to be concerned with.